For 20 years, she sat in the same seat. Third row. Near the wall. Close enough to hear everything. Far enough to be ignored. She arrived early. Left late. Fixed problems no one noticed. And when meetings happened, her name was never on the agenda. Not once. They called her quiet. Reliable. Support staff. Never leader. When executives argued, they talked over her. When decisions were made, they didn't look her way. She learned something important early on. If you speak too soon, they dismiss you. If you stay silent long enough, they forget you exist. So she waited. The crisis began on a Tuesday. A major client threatened to walk. Deadlines collapsed. Numbers bled red across the screen. The boardroom filled with noise, voices overlapping, egos clashing, fingers pointing everywhere except inward. She watched. As she always did. The CEO paced. The managers argued. Consultants spoke confidently and said nothing useful. No one understands the full picture, someone snapped. That was the moment. She raised her hand. Not high, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. The room paused, not out of respect but surprise. Yes, the CEO said, distracted. Make it quick. She stood and spoke one sentence. One sentence that connected the problem no one could explain. One sentence that revealed the mistake everyone else missed. One sentence that made the room go completely silent. No one interrupted her. No one laughed. Because suddenly they understood. She wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she was listening. And they had just realized they'd ignored the only person who knew how to fix everything. No one remembered when she started. There was no welcome email archived in the system. No framed photo on a hallway wall. No speech about a promising future. She simply appeared one day, sat at her desk, and began doing the work no one wanted. At first, she thought it was temporary. She was new. She needed to observe. She needed to learn how things really worked. So she listened. She listened when senior managers contradicted themselves in meetings. She listened when departments blamed each other instead of fixing problems. She listened when promises were made loudly and broken quietly. And she wrote everything down. Her job title changed several times over the years. Operations Assistant, Project Coordinator, Senior Support Specialist. Each new title came with more responsibility and the same level of invisibility. She trained people who would later outrank her. She fixed errors that saved entire contracts. She caught mistakes that never made it into reports because she corrected them before anyone noticed. And every time someone thanked the team, her name was missing. In meetings, she sat exactly where no one looked. Not by accident. She learned quickly that sitting closer to the center invited interruptions. Sitting too far back made you forgettable. Her seat, third row near the wall, was perfect. From there, she saw everything. Who spoke only when the CEO was watching. Who stayed silent when responsibility appeared. Who took credit for work they barely touched. She also noticed something else. The loudest people were rarely the most useful. She tried speaking once. It was early on, during a planning meeting that was already running late. The room was tense, impatient. I think the issue might be. A manager cut her off mid-sentence. We've already covered that. They hadn't. But she nodded anyway. After that, she spoke less. Not because she was intimidated. Because she was strategic. Years passed. Technologies changed. Leadership rotated. Buzzwords came and went. She stayed. When systems failed, she stayed late. When teams collapsed, she absorbed the work. When deadlines loomed, she carried the weight quietly. Her performance reviews were always positive. Dependable. Low maintenance. Always there. Never essential. Outside of work, people assumed she lacked ambition. She's comfortable where she is, someone once said at a company event. She smiled politely. Comfort had nothing to do with it. She was collecting context. By year 15, she knew the company better than anyone alive. Not just what it claimed to be, but what it actually was. She knew which clients stayed out of loyalty and which stayed out of habit. She knew which numbers were real and which were massaged. She knew which systems were fragile and which were quietly holding everything together. She knew where the bodies were buried. Not literal ones. Professional ones. And yet, she remained invisible. When promotions were announced, her inbox stayed quiet. When new leaders arrived, they asked others for insight. Never her. They mistook her silence for simplicity. They were wrong. The crisis didn't surprise her. She had seen it coming months ago. long before the emails turned urgent and the meetings turned frantic. She had flagged early warning signs. Quietly. In writing. In places no one read. Now everyone was shouting. She sat in her chair, hands folded, watching the same people repeat the same mistakes, only louder this time. Then someone said it. No one understands the full picture. That was when she raised her hand. For the first time in years, all eyes turned toward her. Not with respect. With confusion. The CEO barely recognized her. "Yes," he said. "Make it quick." She stood slowly. Not because she was nervous. Because she wanted them to look at her. 20 years of being invisible ended in that moment. And what came next would make them wish they had listened sooner. The room wasn't listening. Not really. They were waiting for her to finish so they could continue arguing. The CEO stood near the screen, one hand pressed to his temple. The numbers behind him blurred into meaningless shapes, red arrows, falling lines, projections no one trusted anymore. "Yes," he repeated. "Make it quick." She didn't rush. She took one step forward, just enough to move out of the shadows of the third row. "I believe," she said calmly, "we're solving the wrong problem." A few people sighed. Someone leaned back in their chair, already dismissing her. The CEO frowned. "Go on." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. She spoke one sentence. "The client isn't leaving because of performance," she said. "They're leaving because they don't trust the data you're sending them." Silence. Not the polite kind. The dangerous kind. Someone laughed softly. "That's not what the reports say." She nodded. "That's because the reports don't show how the numbers were adjusted before delivery." The room shifted. "What do you mean adjusted?" the CFO asked. She turned her laptop toward the screen. No dramatic reveal. Just a simple spreadsheet. "Version 1, she said, clicking. "Internal data." "Version 2, another click. "What the client receives." 2 columns. 2 truths. 1 problem. The CEO stared at the screen. "Who authorized this?" "No one," she replied. It became a habit. People looked at each other. This wasn't accusation. It was exposure. A consultant cleared his throat. "Even if that's true, it doesn't explain why the system failed last week." She looked at him. "It does," she said. "The system didn't fail. It did exactly what it was told." She pointed to a line of logic buried deep in the process. "You optimized for appearances, not accuracy," she continued. "So the moment real data hit the pipeline, everything broke." No one interrupted. Because every word landed. The CEO slowly sat down. "When did you figure this out?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. 8 months ago. 8 months. The number echoed. "And you didn't say anything?" someone snapped. She met his eyes. "I documented it," she said. "Twice. In the monthly risk reports." People began scrolling through emails. Searching. Rereading. Finding her notes. Ignored. Unanswered. Archived. The CEO exhaled slowly. "Can we fix it?" She paused. This was the moment. Not the sentence. The space after it. "Yes," she said. "But not the way you're trying to." "How?" the CEO asked quietly. "You stop managing perception," she said, "and start managing reality." The room stayed silent. Not because they disagreed. Because they understood. For the first time in 20 years, no one spoke over her. For the first time, no one rushed to fill the silence. They waited. "Who are you?" the consultant finally asked. She almost smiled. "Someone who's been listening," she replied. The CEO stood again. "We'll pause this meeting," he said. "Effective immediately." He looked at her. "Stay." Not a request. A recognition. As the room emptied, people avoided her eyes. Not out of guilt. Out of fear. Because they realized something irreversible had happened. The person they had ignored for 2 decades wasn't just quiet. She was essential. And now she had the floor. The meeting didn't officially end. It dissolved. People gathered their laptops slowly, eyes down, movements careful. As if any sudden noise might break whatever fragile truth had just settled in the room. No one spoke to her. Not yet. The CEO remained standing, watching the door close behind the last consultant. When the room was finally empty, he turned back to her. "How long have you really known?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She closed her laptop. Folded her hands. "Long enough to know," she said, "that no one wanted to hear it." The CEO nodded once. Not in agreement. In recognition. What followed wasn't an announcement. It was a shift. Meetings were rescheduled. Agendas rewritten. Executives suddenly wanted data exactly as it is. No filters. No polishing. Her inbox changed tone overnight. Short emails. Direct questions. Not commands. Requests. She was asked to sit closer to the table. Then at the table. Then to speak first. Each step felt heavier than the last. Because visibility, she knew, came with risk. People didn't ignore you when you were invisible. They resisted you when you mattered. Some managers adapted quickly. They listened. They asked questions. They learned. Others didn't. One senior director confronted her in the hallway. "You blindsided us," he said quietly. "You made us look incompetent." She met his gaze. "I described what was happening," she said. "What it made you look like wasn't my choice." He walked away without replying. Behind closed doors, tensions rose. Departments that once operated independently were forced to align. Numbers that had been close enough were now scrutinized. People were uncomfortable. Truth usually was. The CEO called another meeting. Smaller this time. No consultants. No noise. Just people who actually worked. "I want her involved in every critical decision moving forward," he said, gesturing toward her. No objections. Not because they agreed. Because they couldn't argue. For the first time, she saw fear where confidence used to live. And she understood something important. They weren't afraid of her intelligence. They were afraid of accountability. Late one evening, she sat alone in the office. The same building. Different silence. She reviewed systems, traced failures, mapped solutions, not as theory but as execution. She wasn't proving anything. She was fixing things. A message appeared on her screen. "We underestimated you." She stared at it for a long moment. Then closed it. Validation wasn't the point. Change was. The next week, the client called back. Not angry. Curious. They wanted to understand what had changed. The CEO looked at her. She nodded. And took the call. Her voice was steady. Clear. Honest. She didn't oversell. She didn't apologize. She explained. And for the first time in months, the client listened. When the call ended, the CEO exhaled. That went better than expected. She packed her things. "It usually does," she said, "when the truth finally shows up." By the end of the month, the company wasn't saved. But it was no longer lying to itself. And that was enough to begin. In the third row near the wall, her old seat remained empty. No one sat there anymore. Some spaces, once vacated, could never be filled again. Authority didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived with a question. The CEO stood at the head of the table, eyes moving slowly from face to face, then stopped on her. "What do you think we should do?" The room froze. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. This wasn't courtesy. This was a transfer. Every eye turned toward her, not with curiosity anymore, but expectation. She felt the weight of it immediately. And she didn't rush. "We stop pretending the problem is temporary," she said. "We acknowledge that our processes reward comfort instead of accuracy. And we accept that some people will be unhappy when that changes." A few executives shifted in their seats. One of them finally spoke. "You're asking us to rewrite how we operate." She nodded. "Yes. That will expose mistakes." "Yes. And people." "Yes." Silence followed. Not resistance. Calculation. The CEO leaned forward. "Effective immediately," he said. "She will lead the recovery task force." No applause. No congratulations. Just a collective understanding. Things would not be the same again. The backlash came quietly. Not in meetings. In hallways. In delayed emails. In passive resistance. Some managers complied publicly and undermined privately. Others questioned her authority without questioning her conclusions. She noticed everything. She always had. One afternoon, a senior executive requested a private meeting. He closed the door carefully. "I respect your analysis," he said, "but you need to understand how things work here." She waited. "Change too much, too fast," he continued, "and you'll destabilize the company." She looked at him calmly. "The company was already destabilized," she said. "I didn't cause that. I revealed it." He sighed. "You're making enemies." She nodded once. "That's usually what happens when comfort ends." Not everyone resisted. Some people, quiet ones, overlooked ones, began reaching out. Engineers who had stopped speaking up. Analysts whose reports were ignored. Staff who had learned to survive by staying invisible. They brought her information. And for the first time it was used. Decisions changed. Meetings became shorter. Excuses disappeared. Data stopped being adjusted for presentation. People who thrived on ambiguity struggled. People who valued clarity rose quickly. The hierarchy didn't collapse. It corrected itself. The board took notice. Performance stabilized. Clients stayed. The bleeding slowed. One board member said it plainly. "She's doing what we thought consultants were doing." The CEO didn't respond. He knew the truth. The reckoning came 3 weeks later. A restructuring review. Not layoffs. Accountability. Roles were redefined. Responsibilities clarified. And some titles quietly vanished. People who once spoke the loudest were suddenly asked to explain themselves. In detail. On record. One name came up repeatedly. The same senior director who had confronted her in the hallway. The room watched as she presented the findings. Not accusations. Patterns. Decisions made. Warnings ignored. Consequences delayed. The CEO looked at the director. "Is this accurate?" The man opened his mouth. Then closed it. "Yes," he said finally. That was enough. After the meeting, the director cleared out his office. No scene. No speech. Just the sound of a door closing. That evening, the CEO stopped by her desk. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said. "No," she replied. "But it needed to happen." He hesitated. "I should have listened sooner." She met his eyes. "Listening isn't the same as hearing," she said. "You're doing that now." He nodded. As she packed up for the night, she paused. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't exhausted. She wasn't invisible. And she wasn't angry. She felt something else. Clarity. Because power, she had learned, didn't come from speaking louder. It came from being right. And patient. And impossible to ignore. The company didn't celebrate the turnaround. There was no victory email. No headline about survival. Because everyone knew it wasn't a victory. It was a correction. 6 months after the crisis, the office felt different. Not louder. Not happier. More careful. People listened before speaking now. Meetings slowed down. Silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was informative. She noticed everything. Old habits didn't disappear overnight, but they were exposed. When someone interrupted, the room shifted. When data was softened, questions followed. The culture had changed. And it remembered how. Her role was never formally renamed. No grand title. No corner office. But every major decision passed through her. Quietly. Intentionally. One afternoon, the CEO asked her to walk with him. They stopped by the same glass-walled conference room where everything had turned. "I keep thinking about that day," he said. "So do I. I wonder," he continued, "what would have happened if you'd spoken sooner?" She didn't answer right away. Because this question deserved honesty. "You wouldn't have listened," she said. The CEO smiled faintly. "I'd like to believe I would have." She shook her head gently. Belief isn't the same as readiness. That night, she found an old performance review in her archived files. Quiet. Dependable. Not leadership material. She stared at the words for a long time. Not angry. Just aware. She closed the file and deleted it. Some records didn't deserve to survive. A junior employee approached her the next week. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "How did you know when to speak?" She considered the question. "When silence stops protecting the truth," she said, "it becomes part of the lie." The employee nodded, as if he'd been waiting his whole career to hear that. The final meeting was unplanned. An informal gathering. No agenda. The CEO stood and looked around the room. "I want to acknowledge something," he said. "We confused visibility with value." Eyes turned toward her. "And we paid for it." No one spoke. No one needed to. As people filed out, the CEO stopped her. "If you had to say it all in one sentence," he asked, "what would it be?" She thought for a moment. Not about them. About herself. Then she said, "Being quiet doesn't mean being small. It means choosing your moment." Later that evening, she sat once more in the third row. Not because she belonged there, but because she wanted to remember. 20 years of listening. One sentence. That was all it took. Some people left the company. Others stayed and changed. And some never forgot the lesson. The most dangerous voice in the room is often the one you never hear. Until it's too late.